On this Sunday night, victory for Emmanuel Macron. France's centrist president stays in power.
One more time.
Now Macron's next hurdle and what his far-right rival wants her supporters to do. An Easter like no other in Ukraine. 2 months of Russia's invasion and no end in sight. Another phase of the pandemic waits in the wings.
It's nice to be able to travel again and do things with your family.
The recommendations before restrictions are relaxed.
Global National. Reporting tonight, Colleen Christie.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. A sense of some much-needed stability in Europe tonight, at least on the leadership front. Emmanuel Macron is set to be re-elected as the president of France. Exit polls show he won almost 59% of the runoff vote Sunday, with his opponent Marine Le Pen getting just over 41%. The margin of victory is half that of the 2017 election, which was contested between the same two candidates. The second term for Macron spares France and its allies from a wartime shift of power. Our Redmond Shannon has the latest on the French election results tonight. Redmond.
Colleen, Emmanuel Macron has become the first French president in 20 years to be re-elected for a second 5-year term. But right up to the end, this win was far from certain. Turnout was down, and for many voters, it appeared to be more about deciding who they disliked the least.
Merci.
Macron cheered by his supporters under the Eiffel Tower, but now facing a reduced mandate in his second term.
Et je veux ici les remercier.
The incumbent president acknowledging those who didn't vote and those who only voted for him in order to block Marine Le Pen. Unlike 2017, when he was the fresh new outsider, this time Macron was weighed down by the baggage of a difficult, divisive 5-year term in office. Managing the COVID-19 pandemic and dealing with the Gilets jaunes or yellow vest economic protests. Le Pen was defiant in defeat. Despite losing a presidential election for a third time, no indication that she will step away from politics and her far-right National Rally Party. She instead asked her supporters to help block Macron's agenda by turning out for June's legislative elections. The campaign was dominated by concerns about the rising cost of living in France. Macron's critics calling him an arrogant president of the rich as he looks to raise the retirement age. Le Pen campaigned on tighter immigration controls and supports a ban on women wearing Muslim headscarves in public. She also wanted to roll back some integration measures within the European Union and NATO. The war in Ukraine was an election issue too, with Macron alleging Le Pen was too close to Russian President Vladimir Putin, her party having accepted a loan from a Russian bank in 2014. The next step in France's election year will be the legislative elections 2 months from now. Voters will get to decide how much power they want to place in the hands of Macron. Colleen?
Redmond Shannon in London. Redmond, thank you. Ukraine is now marking 60 days of war, and tonight an advisor to President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says he's met with top U.S. officials in Kyiv. The country is also marking Orthodox Easter Sunday, and in a message to the world, Zelenskyy vowed resilience. Abigail Bimman looks at how Ukrainians are trying to celebrate Easter under the cloud of Russia's invasion.
A subdued Orthodox Easter at churches throughout Ukraine, also marking 2 months since the start of the Russian invasion. We heard air raid sirens after Mass, says this priest. It's tragic that people who call themselves Christian do such things. They didn't even stop on the biggest celebration in the world, the resurrection of Christ. Elsewhere, no services at all. Churches like this one, which survived the Second World War, now no longer a place of refuge or prayer. Russian President Vladimir Putin marked the holiday at a church in Moscow. While Ukraine's president vowed wickedness would not destroy the country in an Easter message delivered in a 1,000-year-old Kyiv cathedral. Volodymyr Zelenskyy says the U.S. Secretary of State and Defense Secretary were to visit Kyiv Sunday, the first official visit by U.S. officials since Russia invaded, Ukraine calling for more weapons, money, and sanctions.
It's very important when
our partners go to Ukraine to see by their own eyes what's happened, which atrocities and war crimes Russian army and Russian Federation made in Ukraine.
This week, the UN Secretary General is also set to visit Turkey, Moscow, and Kyiv, though many are doubtful there can be a diplomatic solution right now.
I don't think that the situation on the battlefield yet lends itself to some sort of diplomatic compromise solution. Both sides still imagine that they can win this.
The biggest battle, Mariupol. Ukraine says civilians and soldiers are still holed up under the giant steel plant, now facing Russian bombs. And while humanitarian corridors so far have not been successful,
hundreds of people were gathered at one point to go out of Mariupol, and Russian soldiers just came and said, no, we're not allowing this to happen.
Sunday, Ukraine proposed a special round of negotiations in the city to discuss the fate of those trapped, while Russia has repeatedly denied killing civilians. Abigail Bimman, Global News, Washington.
More than 5 million people have escaped Ukraine since the war began, according to the UN. More than 100,000 of them have applied to come to Canada, and Ottawa says it will accept an unlimited number. The federal government has set up a program waiving a lot of visa prerequisites. That's supposed to speed things up, but as Jamie Dahl reports, some Ukrainians say it's still taking far too long.
Images of the aftermath of a bombing on a mall near Kyiv. Another digital daily update from a husband left in the war zone to his wife, now in Germany.
He is safe, and I pray every day and be safe.
Alina Manzuk fled Kyiv more than a month ago now with her young son Tim, her sister and parents. This was the last time Tim saw his dad before the family was separated by this brutal war.
I wanted to work. I want to normal life. I want to my child go to school or kindergarten. I very wanted normal life.
Manzuk and her family have been trying to come to Canada. They have host families waiting for them in Calgary, but the government's fast-track program to get them here is proving for them not to be fast at all.
We wait a visa to Canada. A long time wait. In this situation, I don't understand why so long.
I was under the impression that the process for getting them over here was going to be streamlined and a lot less red tape. We can't get answers. We're still waiting on the last portion of the application, and we don't know when it's going to be approved.
According to the federal government, 46,000 applicants have been approved and 16,000 Ukrainians have already arrived. It says it's opening 2 new large biometric collection sites in Berlin and Warsaw later this month and are constantly addressing what they call their processes to meet demand. Alina is hopeful Canada will provide her a chance at some normalcy she is so desperately seeking. But deep down, all she truly wants is to one day return home.
My heart is broken, really broken. It's very hard because we want to home. We want to home, but...
Jamie Dahl, Global News, Calgary.
At least 100 people have been killed in an explosion at an illegal oil refinery in Nigeria. Officials say a fire broke out at the facility last night and quickly spread to 2 fuel storage areas. Dozens of workers were caught in the blast. Police are now looking for the owner of the depot. Illegal refinery is an attractive business in Nigeria because it's seen as being relatively easy to pull off, despite the risks. The bodies of 3 women and 7 men have been recovered from the frigid waters of Japan off the northwest coast, where a tour boat vanished yesterday. 16 other people, including 2 children, are still missing. The boat issued a distress call saying it was starting to sink during rough weather. Japan's transport ministry is now investigating why the boat's operator, which had 2 accidents last year, allowed the vessel to head out. At least 6 people, including a child, have been killed after their boat capsized off the coast of Lebanon. The small dinghy was carrying around 60 people when it collided with a naval ship. The Lebanese military says the boat's captain was trying to evade capture. Migrants from Lebanon pay thousands of dollars to smugglers to take them to Europe. The country is in the grip of its worst economic crisis in modern history. As summer draws closer, more Canadians are itching to travel, especially as more restrictions ease for re-entering the country. Starting tomorrow, regardless of vaccination status, children aged 5 to 11 will no longer need a negative COVID-19 test so long as they're with a fully vaccinated guardian. And fully vaccinated travelers will also no longer need to provide a quarantine plan upon arrival. That said, as Marnie Blunt reports, experts are still urging travelers to take precautions.
More and more people taking to the sky as COVID-19 restrictions continue to ease.
It's nice to be able to travel again and do things with your family after being home for 2 years.
And come Monday, traveling in and out of the country is set to get a bit easier for some, with restrictions loosening again. Welcome news for Erica Suderman and her family. She and her husband traveled to Mexico in March, while testing requirements were still in effect for returning to Canada. A reason why they left their 2 children at home.
I think the reason we didn't take the kids was because I didn't want to have to worry about them, getting COVID and having to test and come home. And my kids don't like taking a test. So it was just such we didn't want to take them for that reason.
Travel agencies also welcoming the news, and they expect to see another uptick in Canadians traveling.
That pre-flight test has been expensive, and it's also been a hassle with this round of restrictions being eased. That's really where I notice a lot more families excited to start to travel.
But fewer barriers for travelers can also mean fewer barriers for transmission of the virus.
Remember that the more that mandates and restrictions are dropped, the more that gives us the opportunity to be mobile, to get around, to be around more people. And of course, that's what the virus likes.
Epidemiologists say travelers should research both levels of restrictions and levels of risk at their vacation destination. And with the U.S. dropping mask mandates for air and train travel amid rising cases, now is the time to take extra precaution.
I would strongly encourage people to be wearing a well-fitted mask and to wear it consistently.
And Suderman plans on doing just that, as she looks ahead to planning a trip to Mexico, this time for the entire family.
I would definitely want our trip to be COVID-free, so masking all the way.
Marnie Blunt, Global News, Winnipeg.
Despite growing anger among residents, China is ramping up its zero COVID strategy in Shanghai, with millions still in lockdown. Authorities are now closing off entire neighborhoods with barriers and fences. They've also sealed off entrances to buildings where infections have been detected. Many residents continue to criticize the city's approach, citing poor quarantine protocols and facilities and a lack of access to food and medical aid. Coming up, as rents in this country go through the roof, so too are frustrations. From groceries to gas, Canadians are paying more for, just about everything these days. And you can add rent to the list of expenses that just keep climbing. Now, as Dan Spector reports, the calls are growing louder for governments to do more to keep them affordable.
A loud beginning to a Sunday demonstration that saw hundreds gather in Montreal to demand better access to affordable housing.
We're seeing prices go up everywhere.
This type of turnout and rentals here in Quebec are relatively inexpensive when compared to other parts of the country. According to new data from rentals.ca, the average rent in the city jumped 3.5% in the last year. The increase in Vancouver was nearly 10 times that. This single mom left BC for the lower housing prices in Montreal.
I was in school at the time. We just had our daughter, and it was impossible.
After a dip during the pandemic, rents across the country are rising again.
Vancouver rents year over year for all property types are up almost 30%. Toronto, a little over 14%.
Vancouver and Toronto remain the most expensive places to rent in Canada, but affording an apartment is getting harder almost everywhere.
There are many people who are now priced out of home ownership, who are looking to rent, and who are competing against the folks who probably couldn't have afforded to buy a house in the first place.
All over the country, supply is just not keeping up with demand. And with the price of owning a home skyrocketing in recent years, inflation denting people's wallets, the rental market has become even more competitive.
This government is definitely interested in seeing more housing supply.
Affordable housing was one of the cornerstones of this month's federal budget, the government promising $10 billion to tackle the crisis.
No matter how cheap rents are on the private market, they're never going to be cheap enough for a very large sector of the population.
Experts say rezoning for high-density development and building more subsidized housing are among the solutions. Even still, demand will likely continue to outpace supply as immigration rises and more units are turned back into short-term rentals, with international tourism making its return.
Government can make things less worse, but I think better is going to be pretty challenging.
That means protests like this one are likely to continue popping up across the country. Dan Spector, Global News, Montreal.
And they're off. After a 2-year hiatus due to the pandemic, the Vancouver Sun Run finally kicked off in person today. Thousands of racers packed the city's streets for one of the largest road races in North America. But some didn't wait for today's starting pistol. They got their 10K run in over the last week, as participants were still allowed to participate on their own. Another boost for BC's reputation as host to major international sporting events. Following the 2010 Olympics, it's now considering a 2030 Games bid. Vancouver is also on the short list for World Cup soccer matches in 2026. And last week, a royal announced the Invictus Games are coming to Vancouver and Whistler in 2025. Paul Johnson has the details.
I'm thrilled to announce that the Invictus Games Foundation has selected Canada to host the first ever Winter Hybrid Games in 2025.
It will be the first Invictus Games in Vancouver and Whistler, the first to feature winter sports, and the first major international sporting event in partnership with the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. Established by Prince Harry in 2014, the Invictus Games will see 500 athletes from 20 countries, all of them wounded, injured, or sick, former military men and women who are using sport as part of their recovery. Vancouver's Pierce Bourassa is a retired Canadian Forces corporal who was wounded in Afghanistan. He's a previous Invictus athlete and intends to be involved in some way in the 2025 Games, either as a competitor, volunteer, or spectator.
I think it really changed my life, you know. I was at the time where I had just released from the military and I was a little bit lost, but I got accepted to be part of the Invictus Games and got back into sport, and it really put me on a positive path forward toward my recovery and in my career.
In this winter version, the Invictus Games will have new events like alpine and Nordic skiing and wheelchair curling. And Vancouver and Whistler are well positioned to stage it.
There won't be building any new facilities. We've got everything in place, of course, from the 2010 Games.
In its short history, the Invictus movement has been a success right from the start. And as they branch out into competition on snow and ice, its founder has every reason to expect that success to continue.
But don't worry, we'll still have many of the core sports, the Invictus Games that you know and love, but they'll just be a little cooler.
Paul Johnson, Global News.
And that is Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Colleen Christie. Tonight's Your Canada is the sunset in Quluktuk, Nunavut. We would love to see your corner of the country, so please keep sending your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Donna Friesen will be back at the anchor desk tomorrow. Have a good night.